The moment Lillian Fairmont agreed to the dare, she felt the room tilt against her. The ballroom glowed with candlelight, warm and golden, filling every corner with music and laughter. Silk skirts brushed the floor like soft waves, and jeweled fans fluttered as ladies leaned close to whisper secrets. It was meant to be a night of beginnings, her first true step into London society. Instead, it felt like the start of a mistake she could not take back. "Go on," Lavinia Hartwig said, her smile sharp beneath the sweetness. "You wanted to prove you are not afraid of London. This is how we all begin." The words were wrapped in laughter, but something in Lavinia's eyes made Lillian uneasy. The dare had sounded harmless moments earlier, offered between sips of champagne. "Ask any gentleman to dance, anyone at all. A silly test," they said. "A game." Now she saw the truth. The man stood alone near the terrace doors, untouched by the movement of the crowd. The space around him felt empty on purpose, as if an invisible line had been drawn, and no one dared cross it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark colors that should have blended in, yet somehow made him impossible to ignore. His posture was perfect, his face calm, and his eyes were fixed on the night outside as though the ballroom behind him did not exist. No one approached him. No one even lingered nearby. "Why him?" Lillian whispered, doubt finally breaking through her excitement. "Oh, he's harmless," another girl said lightly. "Just dull. Never smiles, never dances. You'll survive one turn around the floor." The quiet laughter that followed made Lillian's stomach tighten. She realized too late that retreat was no longer an option. Too many eyes were watching now. To refuse would mark her as weak, as provincial, as someone who did not belong. Her aunt had brought her to London for opportunity, not shame. Lillian smoothed the pale blue fabric of her gown and stepped forward. Each step across the floor felt louder than the music. Conversation softened as she passed. She felt eyes follow her, curiosity growing into anticipation. By the time she reached him, her cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin and spoke. "Excuse me," she said, steady despite her pounding heart. "Would you honor me with the next dance?" For a long moment he did not respond. Then he turned. His eyes were not cold, as she had expected, but deep brown and watchful, like someone who noticed far more than he revealed. He studied her carefully, not unkindly, but with an attention that made her feel transparent. "You are new," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I arrived from Yorkshire last week. My aunt is Constance Fairmont. I know of her." His gaze moved past her shoulder, toward the group of young ladies watching them too closely. When he looked back at Lillian, there was something almost amused in his expression. "And who encouraged you to approach me?" The question landed heavily. Lillian swallowed. "It was my idea," she said. "A dare. I did not mean any disrespect." "Good," he said quietly, "because this is the most interesting interruption I've had all evening." He extended his hand. Before she could think better of it, she placed her fingers in his palm. "You should know," he said softly as he led her toward the dance floor, "that asking me to dance is never without consequence." Her breath caught. "Then I apologize." "Do not," he replied. "You have already committed." The orchestra began a waltz as they took their place. The crowd parted around them, shock rippling outward like a dropped stone in water. His hand rested lightly at her waist, steady and controlled. "Relax," he murmured. "You are not walking to your execution." "It feels very similar," she said. He gave a brief, genuine huff of laughter, and something in her chest loosened. They began to move. To her surprise, he danced beautifully, guiding her without force, allowing her to find her balance. The tension in her shoulders eased as instinct took over. "They are always watching," he said quietly. "The trick is deciding whether it matters." "It does to me," she admitted. "I am new enough to care." "That will change," he said. London has a way of exhausting hope. She glanced toward the edge of the floor and saw an older woman in crimson watching them with sharp intensity, a younger blonde beside her frozen in disbelief. "Who are they?" Lillian asked. "Lady Wycliffe and her daughter," he said. his tone tightening. "This evening was meant to convince everyone that my future is already decided." Understanding bloomed, sharp and unwelcome, and by dancing with me, I disrupted a story they were eager to tell, he said. "You did me a favor. The music ended too soon." He released her hand and bowed formally. "Thank you, Miss Fairmont." She barely made it back to her aunt before whispers exploded around her. Her legs trembled, but she kept her posture straight. "Well," Aunt Constance said calmly, "you have certainly been noticed." "I think I've ruined everything," Lillian whispered. "Nonsense," her aunt replied. "You danced with a man no one else would approach. That makes you interesting." The next morning, 7 calling cards arrived before breakfast. Lillian stared at them in disbelief. "You see," Aunt Constance said, tapping the stack, "curiosity is power here." Among them was one card heavier than the rest, sealed with a crest she now recognized. "Miss Fairmont, my mother hosts a musical evening this Tuesday. She has expressed interest in hearing you play." Ashworth. Lillian folded the note slowly. She had crossed the ballroom on a dare, unaware she was stepping into the life of a duke. And now, without meaning to, she stood at the edge of something far more dangerous than humiliation. She stood at the beginning of a choice that could change everything. The invitation sat on Lillian's dressing table all afternoon, its heavy paper seeming to watch her as she moved about the room. By evening, she still had not decided whether to attend. London was already whispering her name, shaping it into something sharp and unkind. Walking willingly into the Duke of Ashworth's home felt like stepping deeper into a storm she did not yet understand. "You will go," Aunt Constance said firmly, adjusting her gloves. "Not because it is safe, but because it is honest. You were invited for your music, not your daring." Lillian nodded, though her stomach twisted as their carriage rolled through the darkening streets. When they arrived, she was struck not by grandeur, but by quiet order. The house was impressive, yes, but lived in. There were flowers placed for pleasure, not display. Lamps glowed warmly, not harshly. The Duke's mother greeted her at the door. Eleanor Ashworth was tall and composed, her silver hair arranged neatly, her eyes alert and kind. She took Lillian's hands in hers and held them for a moment longer than required. "So, you are the young woman brave enough to wake my son from his solitude," she said gently. "I only asked him to dance," Lillian replied, flustered. "And sometimes that is enough to change the course of an evening," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Come, I have been eager to hear you play." The guests were not the glittering youth of the ballroom. They were older, thoughtful, lovers of music and conversation. Lillian felt herself breathe more easily as she spoke with them, her hands steadying as she approached the piano. When she began to play, the room stilled. The notes filled the space softly, then deeper, carrying her away from fear and into memory. She thought of her home in Yorkshire, of evenings by candlelight, of playing not to impress, but to feel. When she finished, the applause was not loud, but sincere. Ashworth stood near the fireplace, watching her with an intensity that unsettled her more than any whisper had. When their eyes met, he inclined his head slightly, a private acknowledgement. Dinner followed. Conversation drifted from music to land, from harvests to politics. Lillian spoke when she felt certain, quiet otherwise. She noticed how Ashworth listened more than he spoke, how his attention sharpened when topics turned to people rather than power. Later, as guests began to leave, she found herself alone with him near the tall windows. "You play as if you mean it," he said. "I do," she replied. "It is the one place where I never pretend." He studied her, thoughtful. London thrives on pretense. "I am learning that." "You do not belong here," he said, not unkindly. "No," she agreed softly, "but perhaps I can survive it." A pause stretched between them, filled with something unsaid. The following days moved quickly. Invitations arrived, some sincere, others thinly veiled tests. Lillian attended carefully, always with her aunt, always polite. Yet she felt the shift around her. Some watched with curiosity, others with quiet resentment. At a garden party hosted by the Ashworth family, the tension finally sharpened into something dangerous. Genevieve Wycliffe stood by the fountain, flawless and cold, her smile fixed. When she approached Lillian, her words were sweet, her meaning cruel. "How kind of the Duchess to support you," Genevieve said. "She is generous to those in need of guidance." Lillian met her gaze calmly. "I am grateful for kindness wherever it appears." "And boldness," Genevieve continued. "Boldness can be misunderstood. So can manipulation," Lillian replied quietly. The silence that followed felt like glass shattering. Later, hidden among rose bushes, Ashworth found her sitting with trembling hands. "You spoke truth," he said. "Truth is expensive here," she replied. "Yes," he agreed, "and it costs women more than men." From that day, the whispers grew darker. Rumors spread like smoke. And Enna of Enna. Lillian was accused of ambition, of scheming, of trapping a man above her station. Invitations thinned. Smiles cooled. Ashworth was furious. "I will put an end to this," he said one evening, pacing the room. "No," Lillian said softly. "Not yet. Let them talk. If you defend me now, they will say I forced your hand. You should not bear this alone." "I am stronger than they think," she replied, though her voice shook, but strength has limits. A letter arrived days later, written in sharp, elegant hand. Lady Wycliffe made her meaning clear. Ashworth needed their political support. His work, his future depended on it. Lillian was a distraction, one that would be removed. The words hollowed her. That night she sat awake, staring into the dark, understanding at last what loving a powerful man demanded. Not romance, but sacrifice. She asked to see Ashworth the next day. They met in the garden, winter creeping into the air. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening. "It is true," he said finally, "but not the whole truth." "Will you choose duty?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will choose what I can live with," he said. "And that is not a life without honesty." Hope flickered, fragile and dangerous. Then the scandal broke. Someone claimed she had been seen leaving his home at night. The implication was vicious. Society turned its back with ruthless speed. Lillian endured it quietly, but the damage was deep. One evening, she overheard the final blow. "He will announce his engagement at the final ball," Lady Wycliffe said smugly. The girl was a passing amusement. Lillian left without a word. By morning, her trunks were open. "I am going home," she told her aunt, "before I lose what remains of myself." That night, a knock came at her door. Ashworth stood there, eyes wild, breath uneven. "You are leaving," he said.
"Yes, do not," he said fiercely. "I have not chosen yet." "You already have," she replied, tears spilling freely now.
"You just do not know it." He stepped closer, breaking all rules. "I choose you," he said, "even if it costs me everything." She looked at him, searching for doubt. There was none. And still, fear held her heart in its grip, because loving him meant standing in a storm that had not yet reached its fiercest point, and it was coming. The night Lillian decided to stay, London did not soften its grip. If anything, the city seemed to lean closer, waiting to see whether she would break or bend into something unrecognizable. The days before the final ball passed in uneasy quiet. Invitations no longer arrived. Friendly faces turned distant. Even familiar streets felt colder. Lillian spent her hours practicing the piano, not because she would perform, but because it was the only place her thoughts slowed enough to breathe. Ashworth came often, though always carefully, always publicly proper. He spoke little of politics now, as if words themselves had become fragile things. Yet in the silences between them, something steadier was forming. Not passion alone, but resolve. "You know," Lillian said one afternoon, watching snow dust the garden paths, "I never imagined my life would be decided in ballrooms and drawing rooms." "And I never imagined mine would be saved in one," he replied. The final ball arrived like a judgment. The grand hall glittered brighter than any night before. Chandeliers blazed. Music rose and fell like a heartbeat. Every powerful family in London was present, drawn by rumor and expectation. Lillian entered on Ashworth's arm. The whispers hit immediately, sharp and unrestrained. Some faces held shock, others satisfaction. Genevieve Wycliffe stood near her parents, perfectly composed, already dressed for victory. Lillian felt the old fear stir, but this time it did not root her in place. She walked forward with her chin lifted, not because she felt brave, but because retreat was no longer an option. Ashworth guided her through the crowd with calm certainty. His presence was not loud, but it carried weight. People watched, recalculated, adjusted their expectations. Lady Wycliffe approached first. "This is unnecessary drama," she said coldly. "You could have spared everyone embarrassment." Ashworth met her gaze evenly. "I am finished sparing people at the cost of my integrity." "You were making a mistake," she said. "A duke does not marry sentiment." "Then it is fortunate," he replied, "that I am marrying a woman, not a strategy." Genevieve's face tightened. The orchestra fell silent as Ashworth stepped forward, guiding Lillian toward the center of the room. Conversations died mid-word. Every eye turned toward them. "I will not keep London guessing any longer," Ashworth said, his voice steady and clear. "I owe honesty to this room, and more importantly, to myself." Lillian's heart pounded so fiercely she feared she might sway. "For months," he continued, "I allowed others to shape my future through rumor and pressure. I permitted silence to be mistaken for agreement. That ends tonight." He turned to Lillian. "Miss Fairmont came into my life by accident. She stayed by choice. She endured cruelty without bitterness, judgment without surrender, and fear without deception. I will not allow her to be diminished because she refused to play a dishonest game." The room was utterly still. "I am not engaged to Miss Wycliffe," he said plainly. "I never have been. I will not be." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I am choosing to court Miss Lillian Fairmont openly and with intention. Whatever consequences follow, I accept them fully." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the orchestra began to play. Ashworth extended his hand. "Dance with me." Lillian placed her hand in his, aware that this single step would echo through the rest of her life. They moved together as they had on that first night, but now there was no uncertainty between them. The dance was not a performance. It was a declaration. Around them, London shifted. Some watched with resentment, others with awe, a few with quiet admiration. Lady Wycliffe left before the dance ended. Genevieve followed. Her perfect composure finally cracked. The weeks that followed were not gentle. Ashworth faced political resistance, but not ruin. Allies emerged where fear had once kept them silent. The legislation he cared for passed narrowly, carried not by manipulation, but by conviction. Lillian was not immediately welcomed into society. Some doors remained closed. Some smiles stayed thin. Yet others opened slowly, cautiously, drawn not by scandal, but by sincerity. She played music again, not in glittering halls, but in smaller rooms filled with people who listened rather than judged. Her reputation changed shape, no longer whispered as a warning, but spoken as a curiosity, then as respect. Ashworth's mother watched it all with quiet satisfaction. "She will be stronger than they expect," Eleanor said one evening. "And kinder." "She already is," Ashworth replied. Spring came softly. Ashworth traveled north with Lillian to Yorkshire, leaving London behind like a heavy coat finally set down. Her brothers were wary at first, measuring him not by title, but by tone and patience. They warmed when they saw how he listened, how he treated their sister not as a prize, but as a partner. Her mother wept openly when he asked permission. "Take care of her," she said simply. "I will," he promised, "and I will let her take care of me." They returned to London engaged, not with spectacle, but with quiet certainty. The tone adjusted as it always did. What could not be dismissed was eventually accepted. What could not be controlled was reframed as destiny. By the time the wedding was announced, it was spoken of as a love match. The scandal softened into legend. Time, relentless and forgiving, did its work. On the morning of her wedding, Lillian stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the city that had nearly broken her.
"Are you afraid?" Aunt Constance asked.
Yes, Lillian replied honestly.
But I am no longer alone with it. The ceremony was simple. Music filled the hall, not grand but warm. When Ashworth took her hands, his grip was steady, familiar, real. "I choose you," he said softly, "not for the room, but for her." "And I choose you," she answered. Years later, when London spoke of the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth, it did so with a mixture of admiration and wonder. They were known not for spectacle, but for balance, for kindness paired with strength, for listening as much as leading. On winter evenings, Lillian played piano in a warm room while Ashworth read nearby, the world quiet beyond the windows. She had danced with the man no one dared approach, and in doing so, she had found not just love, but a life that belonged to her.